Hey there, folks. I do not have a PowerPoint, and I'm just sorry, but I'm just going to talk. And it's not going to be for too long. But what I want to share with you is some thoughts on, in terms of the road ahead, what language will be like in, let's say, 2123. What is language going to be like in the world? Not just English, but language in the world. And I say world because there are 7,000 languages in the world. It's really 6,000, but some people say 7,000, and that sounds better, so I'll just say 7,000 languages in the world. And the truth is that in about 100 years, we would be lucky to have 700. It's probably going to be more like 500. Languages are disappearing in the same way as flora and fauna are disappearing. And so one thing that will be the case in 100 years is that there'll be many fewer languages than there are now around the world. And the reason for that is that globalization, and take it or leave it, probably both, but for better or for worse, globalization is incompatible with there being the diversity of languages that there is now. There's no way that with the world as it's been lately, especially over about the past 50 years, there could exist 7,000 vastly different ways of communicating. And that's because in a globalizing world, a certain few languages are inevitably perceived as cooler, better, as avenues to more income. And in a world like that, where the smaller, more obscure languages are spoken, people are taken away from it to live in, for example, cities where the bigger languages are spoken. And so there are monster languages, such as the one that I'm speaking, that are quickly eating up most of the languages of the world. And so, for example, English, as mundane as this language is in the grand scheme of things, really, about 10 minutes from now, 1 in 3 people in the world are going to speak English, of all things, from some windy island 1,500 years ago. 1 in 3 people are going to speak the language that happened to develop there. And it'll be hard to nudge it out of place, and there is a fantasy that I have, because it's so cool, which is that Mandarin Chinese, which currently is spoken by more people than English, would be the world's universal language and not boring, oppressive English. But it's not going to happen. And that's because Mandarin is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but it's harder than English, and people don't like languages that are hard. And so if you've got a language where you have to master not only the sounds, but the tones, and so if you say ma, that's mother. Ma is horse. Ma is to scold. Ma means hemp for some reason. If you just say ma, then that's a question mark. Sorry. Even speakers of other languages with tone have trouble learning a language with tone. And then the Chinese writing system is a glorious thing, but sorry, no. And so Mandarin is not going to be the universal language. It's going to be English, because English got there first, just like the QWERTY keyboard. That's just the way things go. It's hard to type, and we're stuck with it, and you wouldn't want it any other way. And so we're stuck with it. There are the big 20 languages. It's not going to be just English. There will be about 500 languages. Frankly, I think that's athletic. Some hundreds of languages. People will be bilingual, but English will be the dominant one. But if not English, it'll be others. There's a top 20. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. The top 20. English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, German, Russian, Arabic, Javanese, Japanese, those are different languages, Korean, Mandarin, Cantonese, and Shanghainese of Chinese, Vietnamese, believe it or not. Then in India, it's Hindi, Urdu, Marathi, and Bengali, and then Tamil and Telugu. That's 20. Those are the top 20 languages that are going to take over. I can't believe I did that without reading. Those are the top 20. Indonesian is like right below. Those are the ones that are eating up all the others, and that's the way, unfortunately, it's going to be. Something else about language in the future. Overall, languages are going to get easier. Not always. Russian's hard, and it's going to stay that way. But languages overall are going to get easier. And you can see it happening month by month, year by year. And so, for example, the small languages, the ones that are obscure, the ones that are in danger of dying because now only elderly people are speaking them, you can try to revitalize them, and there are wonderful efforts to do that all over the world. But when you do it, the way it gets revitalized is not the way it used to be. And that's because most languages in the world are much, 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 much harder than English. We English speakers think all languages are like the boy bounced a ball down the street. That's a weirdly streamlined way for a language to be. And so if a language is revitalized, it's going to be simplified because most human languages are too damned hard. And what I mean by that, of course, there's no value judgment. But so, for example, Navajo, the Native American language spoken in the southwestern United States, you know, Navajo has all irregular verbs. All. There's no pattern. And so 5,000 verbs you just have to know. Toddlers take it in, and by the time they realize how crazy this is, they've already done it, and they're busy being teenagers. That's the way it works. Another example, think about in English, woman, women. Whoop, you know, that's the way it is. Goose, geese. Child, children. There are, by my count, 13 of those, and otherwise it's music stand, music stands, right? This is random. Remember when Darfur was in the news a lot? If you were a linguist, you thought, what do they speak there? They speak a language called Fur. In Fur, all the nouns have irregular plurals. Every noun. What is the irregular plural for finger? That they don't say fingers, it's going to be something like funger. What is the plural of dog? And literally, I'm not going to give you the actual word, but the plural of dog is like Google. It's something completely different. And you just have to know. And so if there's a revitalization, it's going to get easier. It's going to be dogs. You're going to fix it. And so there are going to be all of these revitalized languages, and thank God they're going to be spoken, but they're not going to be like they used to be. So there's that. And then there's also something that's happening all over the world. This is something that only linguists and anthropologists study, which is that when immigrants move into a city, and then they have kids. The kids often learn the language of the new country, like you're Turkish and you move to Germany, they speak perfect German. Their parents never do, because over a certain age you're not going to learn a language perfectly. Something that kids often do in their teens is they come up with a way of speaking casually that's somewhere in between the standard and the way their parents spoke, to salute what their parents speak. And so they end up speaking, say, a simplified German. Not super simplified, but getting rid of a lot of the harder things, because that is a way of being somebody who both is in the new society and has these parents. The first time that's recorded to have happened is in Hawaii. There's something called Hawaiian Pidgin. It's not a pidgin, it's a whole language. But where that happened was kids who were Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Puerto Rican. There were 2 West Indians and a few Portuguese kids. All of them are in school. Literally, it was 2. You can document these things. They're all in school. They're learning standard English, but their parents all speak broken English. They learned among themselves to speak this Creole English that kind of splits the difference, although they can speak standard if they want to. That's now happening in what seems like every European capital. It's happening in a lot of African capitals as well. So written language will stay the same, but spoken language will be easier. It'll be more streamlined, because the people who are doing that now at 22 are going to keep doing it when they're 52. So for example, in this country, we think of like this, like as kids. But do you notice that people have been talking that way since the 80s? There are people now who use like that much whose hair is graying. These things settle in. Same thing with these teen ways of speaking. So, easier. And easier in another way too. Not easier structurally, but the third and final thing is that language around the world is going to be less formal. This is something that probably begins in the United States in the late 60s. And now the general informality is almost a rule. And so in this country, for example, it used to be that if I stood up here and gave this speech, I would have a piece of paper, I'd be reading from it, I'd be using a lot of $64,000 words, and I would have cleared my throat before I said anything. Instead, I'm standing here in a sport coat I don't usually wear and just kind of talking out of my head. That would have been unheard of as late as 1960 in this particular setting. And so it means that, of course, in the old days, there was colloquial language, but you just don't know about it. And so, for example, there's a Looney Tune, ancient one, like way back, where at one point, the first Looney Tunes character was not good like Bugs Bunny. It was this Mickey Mouse knockoff named Bosco. Bosco sucked. He was just awful. But in one cartoon, he's really, really angry, and he looks at this character, and he says, "You dirty pup!" And you're thinking, dirty pup? That was hot pepper back then. To call somebody a dirty pup, like your great-great-grandparents, that was like calling somebody a dirty something else. The reason that it's so hard to know that, unless you watch really bad old cartoons or really trivial old novels, is because people didn't put that sort of thing in print. That's changed. And so most of us here are familiar with seeing the Con Ed trucks go by, where, say, the slogan is, "On it, on it." Like, you know, something's broken, we're on it. That's great. But if you think about it, that would not have been a slogan in, say, 1990. I don't think even in 95. It's too colloquial. Or, if I may, this is something we show our children. There's a book, a children's book called Go the Fuck to Sleep. We are in a brand new era, and, you know, it's a wonderful thing. That is happening all around the world, that line between the formal and the informal is not what it used to be. So, you know, these are supposed to be 10-minute talks, and I've gone over, and that's just not done. So I'm going to summarize by saying that we are moving on to a future of language where there aren't going to be as many of them. They are going to tend to be easier, and the line between the formal and the informal is going to be much hazier. And you know, formality is overrated, and all languages have always been too hard. I'm not dreading going into this future on the, watch what I'm going to do, road ahead. However, as a linguist, there is a part of me that looks at the road before, and people like me are diligently concerned with documenting the way language was in the past, because there were good things about that too. But the road ahead is going to be very different from where we are now. Thank you.